Have you ever walked into your backyard and caught someone digging a grave-sized hole with your child nearby, strapped to a wheelchair, terrified and unable to move? I did. And I swear to you, for a moment, the entire world went quiet. My name is Neil Gordon, and I live in what used to be a quiet gated community in North Carolina. We moved here for peace, safety, and a sense of neighborhood. What we got instead was Eliza Gordon, my ex-wife and newly appointed HOA president, who decided my 10-year-old disabled daughter was an eyesore that lowered property values. My daughter Peyton has been in a wheelchair ever since the accident 3 years ago. She's bright, funny, full of life, and the reason I wake up every morning. But to Eliza, she was just a symbol of imperfection, a blemish she wanted to erase. I never thought she'd actually act on that hate. That day, I had only left for 20 minutes. When I came back, I found Eliza in my backyard with a shovel, dirt all over her knees, and Peyton crying silently beneath the oak tree. And the most chilling part, Eliza looked right at me and smiled like she was doing us both a favor. What would you do if someone tried to hurt your child and smiled while doing it? Let me know in the comments. Because what she didn't know was that the shovel in her hand had a GPS tracker installed, and I was already on my way to uncover everything. My name is Neil Gordon. For most of my life, I wore a different name classified, buried in files locked behind steel doors in Washington. I served as an intelligence officer for over 2 decades, spending my youth infiltrating terrorist cells and intercepting threats before they reached American soil. But that's not the life I wanted to carry into fatherhood. When my wife and I had Peyton, I retired, traded danger for diapers, and swore I'd give her a normal life. Or as normal as life could be when your past haunts you and your marriage starts to collapse under its weight. Eliza, my ex-wife, used to be kind. I remember her sitting on the hospital bed with Peyton in her arms, whispering lullabies. But grief changes people, and sometimes it twists love into bitterness. After the accident that paralyzed Peyton from the waist down, Eliza drifted. We both did. But while I turned inward to care for our daughter, she turned outward to the community, to appearances, to pretending everything was perfect, even when it wasn't. When the divorce finalized 2 years ago, Eliza petitioned for the HOA presidency like it was a second chance at control. She moved 2 blocks over and began treating the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. That's when the small things began: complaints about the wheelchair ramp, fines for visible medical equipment, and rules about non-decorative structures when Peyton's therapy equipment was placed in the yard. At first, I thought it was just Eliza being Eliza obsessive, controlling, but the more I ignored her notices, the more aggressive she became. Peyton, on the other hand, has always been stronger than both of us. At 10, she's already mastered how to make people forget the chair. She's witty, full of mischief, and can out-chess most grown men. The day she asked me, "Daddy, do you think people stare because I'm glowing?" I laughed and cried all at once. She never complains. Not once. Even on cold days when her legs ache, or when her friends stop inviting her to birthday parties held in places she can't access. She simply reads another book or builds cities out of Legos. After the accident caused by a drunk driver who swerved onto the sidewalk while we were walking home from school, Peyton spent 3 months in the hospital and nearly a year in rehabilitation. I was there every single night, sleeping upright in those god-awful hospital chairs. Her mother visited a few times but said it was too hard to watch her like that. That's when I knew Eliza had already detached from our daughter. She wanted the version of Peyton that ran in ballet shoes and posed perfectly for Christmas cards. She couldn't handle the reality of a child with permanent injuries. And somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing Peyton as a person. She saw her as a burden, a reminder of something broken. But I made Peyton a promise in that hospital room. Right before her spinal surgery, I told her, as long as I'm breathing, no one will ever hurt you again. I meant it then. I mean it now. I don't care if the threat comes from across the world or across the street. I keep our house locked, secure. I installed security cameras, reinforced gates, and even trained our golden retriever, Max, to bark at anyone who crossed into the backyard uninvited. I never imagined I'd have to use my military-grade GPS tagging system on gardening tools, but I had them installed just in case. My instincts never sleep. And that day, they saved my daughter's life. Peyton didn't understand the danger when she saw Eliza approaching with the shovel. She told me later that she thought Eliza came to apologize. It broke my heart to hear the disappointment in her voice when she said, "Daddy," she used to sing to me. No child should have to question whether they're safe in their own yard, and no father should ever return home to find dirt on their daughter's wheels. I left the battlefield years ago, but on that day, I realized the war had found me again. And this time, it was personal. If you saw Eliza Gordon at first glance, you'd never expect the darkness hiding behind the pearls and pastel sweaters. She had the look of a southern belle, the kind that always smelled like rose water and spoke with a sweet smile that barely masked the venom underneath. But once she got the HOA presidency, that smile turned into a sneer, especially when aimed at us. She didn't become president of the Homeowners Association by accident. Eliza treated the position like a corporate throne. She charmed the retired vets on the board, baked pecan pies for the widows, and plastered her picture on every community flyer. Her campaign slogan, "Preserve the Beauty of Maple Ridge." That sounded noble enough until she started using it to justify kicking out anything she personally didn't like. And what Eliza didn't like most of all was our daughter, Peyton. The moment she took over, she called me into a meeting, not at the HOA office, but at her house. I remember the floral curtains, the lemon-scented furniture polish, and the way she didn't even offer me water. She handed me a typed notice, neatly folded in a monogrammed envelope. It read, "Your visible wheelchair ramp must be removed within 30 days to maintain neighborhood appearance standards." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. When it didn't come, I asked, "You do realize that's for Peyton?" "Right." Her eyes narrowed. "There are regulations. Neil, you're not above them." I could have fought her then and there, but I knew better. People like Eliza don't expose their worst right away. They do it piece by piece, slowly wearing you down while smiling for the neighborhood barbecue. Soon after, she began issuing citations for things like excessive medical devices in plain view and disruptive noise anytime Peyton laughed too loud while playing outside. She complained about the eyesore of our therapy swing, even though it was tucked neatly behind our fence. Then came the letter banning us from decorating for Halloween because wheelchair accessibility ramps are a tripping hazard for trick-or-treaters. It became clear Eliza was on a mission, not just to erase any signs of Peyton's disability, but to erase us from the neighborhood altogether. Still, I tried to reason with her. I asked her, not as a neighbor, but as the mother of Peyton, to show some compassion. That was when she said something I'll never forget. "You're always talking about what Peyton needs. What about what the community needs? She makes people uncomfortable." "Neil, that's not fair to everyone else." That sentence still haunts me. What kind of person sees a child in a wheelchair and thinks that is the problem? The mask started to slip after that. She didn't hide her disgust anymore. She made public comments during HOA meetings about certain families making the neighborhood feel more like a hospital than a home. One time, she even mocked Peyton's wheelchair design, calling it an eyesore on wheels. I wanted to explode, but Peyton was right there, holding my hand, squeezing it tightly like she was the one comforting me. What's worse is that some of the neighbors nodded along, not because they agreed, I think, but because Eliza intimidated them into silence. She had this way of making people afraid to speak up. You didn't want to be her next target, but I'm not one to back down from bullies. I started documenting everything, every citation, every interaction, every offhand comment. I built a digital case file thicker than any mission dossier I ever compiled in my military days. I didn't know when or how I'd use it, but I knew the day would come when I'd need it, and that day came sooner than I expected. Looking back, the signs were there, the cold stares, the hostility that no longer tried to hide, the way she looked at Peyton not with pity, but with hatred. Like Peyton's very existence offended her. I should have known Eliza was capable of cruelty. I just never thought she'd try to bury it alive. It was a Saturday, clear skies, crisp air, The kind of morning that made you believe the world was still good. I had promised Peyton we'd go to the local library after breakfast. She wanted to check out a book on robotics. She'd been obsessed with figuring out how to modify her wheelchair on her own, already sketching ideas in a pink notebook full of diagrams and stickers. We had just finished pancakes when my phone buzzed. The plumber called to reschedule a job we'd been waiting weeks for. He was available now, but only if I could meet him at the hardware store in the next 20 minutes. I asked Peyton if she was okay staying in the backyard while I ran the errand. She nodded and gave me a mock salute. "Sir, yes, sir," she said with a grin. She was safe. Our backyard was fenced, locked, protected, cameras on every corner. Max, our golden retriever, lounging beside her like a fluffy bodyguard. I kissed the top of her head, told her I'd be back before she finished her apple juice, and drove off. I was gone for exactly 23 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong. Max wasn't barking like he always did. The backyard gate was open, a gate I always locked, and the air, it was too still. I ran. What I saw next stopped my heart cold. Peyton sat frozen in her wheelchair under the old oak tree, her face pale, eyes wide with silent terror. Behind her, Eliza was hunched over the earth, sweat glistening on her brow as she drove a shovel into the soil. A wide pit had already been carved 4 feet deep and nearly the same in length. Her manicured hands were caked with dirt, and, beside her, Max lay unconscious. Drugged, knocked out? I didn't know. Eliza didn't flinch when she saw me. She didn't run or hide the shovel. She stood upright, brushed the hair from her face, and said calmly, "You're home early." For a second, I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The sheer absurdity, the absolute horror paralyzed me more than any battlefield ever had. "What the hell are you doing?" I finally shouted. Her eyes narrowed. "You don't get it. Neil, you never did. She doesn't belong here. None of this belongs here." I moved to Peyton first. Her hands were shaking, gripping the armrests of her wheelchair so tight her knuckles were white. I crouched, held her face in my palms, and whispered, "You're safe now, baby." "I'm here," she whispered back. She said she was going to help me sleep forever. I stood up and faced Eliza. "What did you give the dog?" I growled. "Benadryl," she said without hesitation. "Don't be so dramatic. I wasn't going to hurt her. I was going to give her peace. Real peace. You've turned her into a symbol of your weakness." It was at that moment I stopped seeing Eliza as a difficult ex-wife or a bitter HOA president. She was a monster. I reached for my phone, but she lunged forward, shovel raised. I dodged, adrenaline kicking in. My training returned in a flash. I twisted the shovel from her grip and shoved her backward. She tripped over the edge of the pit she'd dug and landed flat on her back. Then came the sirens, and not by chance. You see, 3 months prior, I'd had GPS trackers discreetly embedded in all HOA-owned maintenance tools after a string of petty thefts. I'd helped the HOA board install the technology to keep inventory safe. What they didn't know is that I retained real-time access. The moment the shovel was removed from the HOA shed and crossed onto my property, my phone received a silent alert. And when it didn't return within the hour, I activated a secondary alarm alerting the local sheriff's department of potential criminal misuse. Deputy Thomas Walker, an old Army buddy of mine, had responded personally. He arrived just as Eliza was pulling herself out of the hole, her clothes smeared with dirt, her face wild with panic, now that she realized her plan had unraveled. "Step away from the child," Thomas barked, weapon drawn. Eliza tried to compose herself. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was gardening." I save it. I interrupted. "We have security footage, GPS logs, my daughter's testimony, and a golden retriever that'll wake up with a hell of a headache." Thomas didn't hesitate. He cuffed her, read her rights, and escorted her into the squad car. The neighbors began to emerge from their houses. Eleanor Hayes, our sweet old neighbor from across the street, came running over with her hand over her mouth. "I saw her go in your yard," she whispered, but I thought. I didn't know. I didn't want to believe. That's the problem with people like Eliza. They hide their cruelty behind politeness, their madness behind manners, And most people don't look closely enough until it's almost too late. I filed a restraining order that very day. But it wasn't enough. Eliza was formally charged with attempted murder, trespassing, and child endangerment. Her trial would come later, but for that moment, justice had begun. I stayed up that night beside Peyton's bed. She didn't want to sleep alone, and honestly, neither did I. She whispered. Why did she hate me so much? I had no answer. Only this: some people fear what they don't understand, but that's not your burden to carry. It's theirs. She nodded, and finally, sleep came. But for me, it didn't, because I knew this wasn't just about Eliza. It was about everyone who looked the other way. The next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. You could feel it in the air tension, disbelief, whispered conversations on porches, blinds cracked open just enough to spy. No one knew what to say about what happened. And, frankly, I didn't care. My only concern was Peyton. She refused to go outside, not even to the backyard. What if she gets out? She asked me with trembling hands. What if she comes back? I knelt beside her and said, she won't hurt you again. I promise. But the truth was, even behind bars, Eliza still had power. Her influence in the HOA hadn't disappeared overnight. There were whispers neighbors who defended her, saying she must have snapped from stress. Others claiming I had exaggerated the story. There were even those bold enough to suggest I staged the whole thing for sympathy. That's when I knew being right wasn't enough. I needed to go public. So I made a decision I never thought I would. I revealed who I really was. I wrote a letter to the entire Maple Ridge community, printed, signed, and hand-delivered to every doorstep. It began like this. You know me as Neil Gordon, the quiet single father who lives at 104 Willow Ridge Lane. What most of you don't know is that I served 22 years in the United States Army as an intelligence officer. I've worked with the Pentagon, led investigations overseas, and taken oaths most of you have only read about in newspapers. I don't say this for sympathy. I say this because the safety of my daughter and this community is not something I take lightly. I included timestamps, GPS logs, screenshots, even stills from my security cameras. I outlined Eliza's escalating behavior over the past 2 years and ended with this: if she hadn't been stopped when she was. My daughter might not be here today. The response was immediate. Neighbors who had been silent reached out, some with apologies, others with their own stories, how Eliza had fined them for putting up wind chimes, how she ordered someone to repaint their mailbox because it was the wrong shade of navy. It was as if her downfall gave the neighborhood permission to finally speak up. Still, I knew the law would need more than angry neighbors and digital files. That's where Deputy Thomas Walker came in. He met me at a diner 2 towns over, away from the media frenzy. He slid a folder across the table, sealed, confidential. Eliza's record isn't as clean as she made it out to be. He said, she's been in therapy twice for anger issues, once for psychiatric evaluation after a custody dispute got violent in her early 20s. She hit it all when she ran for HOA president. Did anyone vet her? I asked. He sighed. No. HOA boards don't run background checks unless someone files a formal complaint. Until now, no one had the guts. I filed that formal complaint myself that very afternoon, and I attached everything: her history, my recordings, and Peyton's own words, recorded gently in her childlike voice, recounting how Eliza said she'd help her rest forever. Within a week, Eliza was officially removed as HOA president. But the real turning point came at the preliminary hearing. Eliza stood in court, dressed in beige slacks and a pressed blouse, like she was attending a PTA meeting. Her lawyer argued mental instability, temporary psychosis, claimed the stress of her role and the divorce had driven her to a moment of irrational behavior. I requested to speak. The judge raised an eyebrow when I stepped onto the stand. I don't come here as a father, I said. I come here as someone who's spent decades recognizing threats before they turn deadly. Then I laid out my career: counterterrorism, risk analysis, human behavior. I told them how I saw the signs, the escalation, the calculated moves disguised as policy. I described the day she stood over a hole she'd dug with her own hands and looked at my daughter like she was a problem to be removed. And then, For the first time, I cried on the stand. I've witnessed cruelty in war zones, but nothing prepared me for the day I saw someone I once loved, someone who once sang lullabies to our baby girl, try to bury her alive. The courtroom went silent. Even Eliza looked away. The judge denied bail. Eliza was remanded to county jail pending trial. She faced charges of attempted murder, child endangerment, assault, and unlawful entry. Her lawyer tried to push a plea deal, but the prosecution wouldn't budge, not with the evidence stacked so high. After the hearing, Thomas met me outside. "You could press charges against the HOA too," he said. "Negligence, failure to protect, maybe even civil liability." But I shook my head. "No," I replied. "I'm going to do one better." That night, I filed a petition to restructure the HOA. With Eliza gone and dozens of homeowners finally standing up, we voted to overhaul the entire board. I wasn't planning to run, but Peyton asked me to. "Maybe if you're in charge," she said softly. "No one else's dad will have to be scared like you were." How could I say no? I was elected president of the Maple Ridge HOA 2 weeks later, unopposed. Funny how life works. I never wanted power. I just wanted peace. But sometimes, the only way to protect the ones you love is to step into the fire yourself. The trial date was set for early spring. By the time the courtroom doors opened, the dogwoods were blooming, and Peyton had returned to smiling again, though she still flinched at the sound of a shovel scraping gravel. The prosecution built their case methodically, brick by brick. They laid out the timeline, the motive, and the physical evidence. The GPS tags embedded in the HOA tools placed Eliza at the scene. Surveillance footage showed her entering my yard without consent. And then there was Peyton's testimony, recorded privately with a child psychologist present. It broke everyone in that room. She told me I was broken. Peyton said softly on the recording. She said the world would be better if I didn't have to suffer. There was no way to twist those words into kindness. No mental gymnastics would soften the horror of it. Not even Eliza's legal team could dress it up. They tried, of course. They claimed diminished capacity, emotional trauma from our divorce, pressure from her role as HOA president. They painted her as a woman unraveling under the burden of responsibility. But the jury wasn't moved. It took them 3 hours to return a unanimous verdict guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Eliza to 15 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 8. The courtroom didn't erupt in applause. It exhaled. You could feel the collective relief. Some cried. Eleanor Hayes sat in the front row, clutching her purse like it was her lifeline, whispering prayers under her breath. Peyton wasn't there for the sentencing. I didn't want her anywhere near that courthouse again. Instead, I picked her up from school that day and took her to her favorite diner. Over grilled cheese and chocolate milkshakes. I told her, it's over. She can't hurt anyone now. She didn't say anything at first, just stared out the window. Then she looked at me and asked, "Do you think people will still look at me like I'm different?" I paused before answering. "They might," I said, "but that's not because something's wrong with you. It's because something's missing in them." She smiled. Not a big one, just enough to let me know she was healing. Back in Maple Ridge, change swept through the neighborhood like a long overdue spring cleaning. The HOA was restructured from the ground up. We rewrote the bylaws, eliminating loopholes that allowed harassment to masquerade as regulation. We added new protections for residents with disabilities, including strict penalties for discriminatory citations. And we created a new community watch program, one that didn't just look for code violations, but looked out for one another. Neighbors who had once stayed silent found their voices. Margaret and Ronald, a retired couple down the block, admitted they'd been fined for installing a ramp for Margaret's walker. They had paid it without question, afraid to stir trouble. But now, they hosted porch gatherings every Friday evening, open to all, especially the kids. The biggest surprise came from a man named Joel, who had kept to himself for years. One day, he walked up to Peyton and handed her a small wooden carving of a phoenix. "I heard what you went through," he said, voice trembling. "You didn't just survive, you rose." Peyton keeps that phoenix on her windowsill. As for Max, He made a full recovery. He's older now, a little slower, but still patrols the backyard like it's sacred ground. We installed a second gate and upgraded the cameras, not out of fear, but out of promise to never be caught off guard again. I was sworn in officially as HOA president at the monthly meeting in May. Not something I ever dreamed of, but I accepted it with pride. My first order of business was to rename the Central Park Peyton's Place, not in memory but in honor. A symbol that our community didn't just punish evil, it celebrated resilience. Some people moved away after the trial. Others moved in, drawn by the story they'd heard online. Turns out, the story had gone viral. A local news outlet picked it up, then a national one. The idea that a child's life was saved because her father embedded a GPS tag in a shovel caught the world's imagination. They called it the HOA horror story that turned into a lesson on love. But we didn't care about the headlines. We cared about home. A few months later, I found myself watching Peyton play in the front yard again, laughing with a few of the neighbor kids. She was showing them how to use the joystick on her upgraded chair, which now had cup holders, Bluetooth speakers, and a small flag with a lightning bolt she designed herself. I sat on the porch steps with a cold glass of lemonade, letting the warmth sink in. I thought about everything we'd lost, everything we'd gained. Eliza was gone. But the damage she tried to do had left a mark, and somehow, that scar made us stronger. People think justice is about revenge. It's not. Justice is about protection, about restoration, about telling a child who's been hurt that the world will not let the person who did it walk away smiling. And when you're lucky, justice is about something more. It's about building something better from the ashes. Maple Ridge became that place. Not perfect, but good. And I finally allowed myself to believe in peace again. It's been a year since Eliza was taken away in handcuffs. The seasons have changed. The trees have bloomed and shed and bloomed again. And somehow, life settled into something calm, something beautiful. Peyton no longer flinches at the sound of footsteps behind her. She rides her wheelchair with confidence, her flag flapping in the wind like a banner of defiance. She's joined a robotics club, and her latest project, a solar-powered wheelchair prototype. She says it's for kids who don't like to sit still even when they have to. She laughs when she says it, but I see it in her eyes. She wants to make sure no child ever feels stuck the way she once did. We spend our afternoons in Peyton's Place. The plaque still gleams beneath the oak tree, where the hole once was. It's a quiet reminder of what almost happened and what didn't. Sometimes, I still catch myself waking in the night, reaching for the phone, checking the cameras. Old habits, old scars. But then I hear her snoring softly from the next room, Max curled up beside her bed, and I remind myself we're safe. This community, once ruled by fear and appearances, is now a place of protection, of openness, of healing. Not because of rules or titles, but because people found the courage to speak, to act, to care. And I found the strength to stop hiding who I was and to stand for something bigger than myself. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt powerless, whether as a parent, a neighbor, or just a human being, you are not alone. You can speak up. You can protect what matters. And when justice finally comes, it may not erase the pain, but it will build something stronger in its place. If you believe in justice and love seeing HOA Karens get what they deserve, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel HOA Revenge. We post gripping, real-life HOA dramas every day that you won't want to miss. Your support keeps us going. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next story.